Order. Welcome to this oral evidence session of the Education Select Committee this morning. This is a single deep dive evidence session on the important issue of teacher recruitment and retention. And I'll ask our witnesses to introduce themselves to us in a moment. But first of all, can I invite any members of the committee who'd like to make a declaration of interest to do so?
I declare that I'm the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Schools, Learning and Assessment, which the NEU provides the Secretariat for.
Thank you very much. So can I invite our witnesses this morning to introduce yourselves to us, starting with Daniel Kebede.
I'm Daniel Kebede. I am the General Secretary of the National Education Union.
Morning everyone, I'm Kathryn Morgan. I'm the Leadership and Workforce Specialist at ASCL, the Association of School and College Leaders.
Good morning, I'm Jack Worth. I'm Education Workforce Lead at the National Foundation for Educational Research, NFER.
Lovely, thank you very much. So we know that teacher recruitment and retention has been a matter of debate and a significant challenge within the education sector for a very long time. We know that there are multiple different dimensions to this challenge, and we hope to explore some of those issues today. Our predecessor Select Committee described teacher recruitment, training and retention as a persistent challenge for over a decade. Can I start by asking, in 2025, under a new government, how does this challenge continue to manifest, and what are the most serious concerns? And I'll start with you, Daniel, if that's okay.
So there have been some green shoots, some improvement in recruitment, but we have to take that into the context of the wider economy, and there is a restriction on the number of graduate jobs in the wider workforce at the moment. But there have been some positive improvements. But we do also need to remember that we are starting from historic lows. So, recruitment targets have been missed 12 times in the last 13 years. Mm-hmm. And really, there is a huge issue around retention. So even if, current recruitment levels were sustained, it is like trying to fill a bucket with water that's got a hole in. Mm-hmm. The issue around retention is pretty dire at the moment. The statistics around a quarter of teachers leaving within 3 years still remains. There is a third leaving within 5 years, that still remains. And actually we do have a real issue around the retention of school leaders at the moment. Heads are leaving the profession at record levels, quadruple the rate of 2010. So whilst there are some positive shoots of improvement, the situation is still fairly dire. And that is because, there are persistent problems that remain. We really support what the Secretary of State has done around the issues of child poverty and so on, but the day-to-day experience of teachers and support staff on the ground in school, because of restrictions in funding, high levels of workload, pay that's being held back, is still pretty dire.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Kathryn.
I think to build on what Daniel's just said and focus on school leadership, that is a huge area of concern. Obviously we need teachers in the classroom, but we also need schools where there are leaders who are able to serve the school community, children, teachers and so forth. I think at ASCL we're increasingly aware through our membership surveys, through our hotline data, that things are really tough out there for school leaders. And obviously you have reports such as the Teacher Wellbeing Index, and that points to an increasing amount of people who are feeling really stressed in the profession. But we've just run a series of leadership conferences up and down the length and breadth of the country. And the qualitative feedback that we're having from our members is that things are really tough. And whilst, as Daniel has said, there are some green shoots with recruitment, there are real challenges about people choosing not to go into school leadership. So we've got an increasingly younger leadership workforce where we're losing so many of our more experienced school leaders. And there's now research that's about to be published in January by Professor Toby Greene at the University of Nottingham that points to the fact that actually people don't want to go into headship. So we now have a mixed economy in our country where we've got local authority maintained schools, multi-academy trusts, and we have a huge problem with a lack of people wanting to go into headship. So whether you're in a local authority maintained or a multi-academy trust, people are opting not to take on that really important job. And so I think from our perspective, we've got huge concerns with how, when talking about recruitment and retention, we're really focusing on the retention of school leaders and thinking about how we can maintain that expertise within the system.
Yeah, we have seen some improvements the last few years, but that was from quite a low base. So there's been an increase in recruitment into initial teacher training. I think that's because of the slowdown in the wider labour market primarily. So that can't be guaranteed to stay around forever. But that has been positive and has meant that some of the shortage measures that we have in terms of the flows of teachers coming in seem much more positive. So meeting a lot of the key, the targets in key subjects, but not for secondary overall. So we're still kind of 12% below the target in secondary teachers overall, and that's including both 100% over recruitment of PE teachers and under recruitment in other subjects. So despite that more positive picture, there are challenges still, and 85% was kind of the level it was before the pandemic, when there was still concern about the number of teachers coming into secondary teacher training. So particularly at secondary, because that's where we've seen recent growth in pupil numbers, there has been a lot of challenge, and that has impacted on schools and the quality of education that they're able to deliver. So, for example, kind of 1 in 8 maths lessons continues to be taught by a non-specialist teacher. That's higher in Key Stage 3, so kind of year 7 to year 9, and it's also much higher in schools in disadvantaged areas, who are the ones that are most likely to struggle with recruitment and retention. And I think that needs to be borne in mind, the fact that the impact of all of those shortages over the last 10 years have impacted schools and leave schools in a worse place in terms of their staffing, and simply getting to the ITT target, that's a replacement metric. That means we're replacing the teachers that are leaving, and with new teachers that are coming in. That doesn't mean that we're reversing the kind of damage that has been done over many years. So the challenges certainly remain despite the increase in recruitment and also the improvement in retention. I think it's worth saying that retention has improved slightly, but still 9% of teachers leave every year. That was 10.5% maybe 10 years ago, but it has improved. So that there are positive signs that recruitment and retention are showing some signs of improvement.
Thank you. I'll bring in Chris.
Thank you. I do declare interest as a former teacher myself. Kathryn, you touched upon the fact that there's different institutions, and without giving my view, I would just put it to you that we have got quite a fragmented education system at the moment. We've got free schools, we've got multi-academy trusts, we've got single academy trusts, we've got very large MATs and some very small MATs. I wondered if there is any data or evidence that you may have with regards whether there are particularly good examples of recruitment and retention in different areas, or even the flip side, particularly bad examples of recruitment and retention, and why that might be, and any sort of good examples where institutions or MATs or whatever have done a good job at recruitment and retention, and why.
That's a really good question. I think that there is a growing body of multi-academy trusts, particularly large ones, who are able to, because of the size and the capacity that they have, they're able to target their recruitment initiatives perhaps a little bit more than a local authority maintained school. So we are then potentially creating a challenge for colleagues who perhaps find themselves in an area where there isn't a multi-academy trust. I think, to pick up on Jack's point, fundamentally, whether it's a MAT or a local authority, these challenges are felt so much more acutely in our most disadvantaged communities. So I think in terms of case studies of best practice, we don't necessarily have any to hand at present, but I think it would be really interesting for the Department for Education, for other leadership unions, teaching unions like ourselves, to really focus on how we can capture some of that good practice, particularly for those disadvantaged areas, because I think they're the ones that struggle the most. I'm actually a trustee at Greenshaw Learning Trust, and I know from that experience the recruitment and retention, the recruitment of new teachers into some of the schools within Greenshaw has been really positive, because they've been able to spread the message and the success of schools within local areas and use teachers and leaders to go in to advertise. But there's also been a growing focus on recruiting previous students back into the teaching workforce, and I think that's worked quite well.
Thank you. I'll go to Darren.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, everything that you've just said in describing the lie of the land at the moment is in the context of the government's commitment to recruit 6,500 teachers. To what extent, even if every single one of those 6,500 is recruited, will that meet the workforce need at the moment? Is that target sufficient, in other words? Jack, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think it is ambitious, and it's been framed in the right areas, because the shortages are in secondary schools, as well as the challenges in FE of attracting teachers into further education. Really important, especially when student numbers are growing or are likely to grow over the next few years, and special schools and alternative provision, where again there's really some evidence of struggling to recruit and retain the teachers they need. So so those areas I think are good to focus it, because on the flip side, you've got primary schools where actually pupil numbers are falling, and actually recruitment and retention has been relatively healthy in the past. So actually, focusing on those areas does make sense. In terms of whether it's sufficient, I think that really depends on the nature of those teachers. So I think the manifesto kind of talked about key subjects, and I think the definition is broader in terms of the overall number of teachers, but clearly if there are a lot more PE specialists at the end of it, and not quite as many kind of physics, maths, computing, chemistry, the kind of subjects that really struggle with recruitment and retention, then not quite so many of them, then it may have met the target but missed the point. So I think there's variations in terms of how that is delivered. It seems proportionate to the challenge, but it's not going to solve all of the challenges or reverse all of the effects on the quality of education that's been happening in the last decade.
I think it's, building on what Jack said, it's about then ensuring that those new teachers stay, that they're actually able to enter a workforce that isn't constantly feeling depleted and on its knees because of the growing expectations and challenges that teachers and leaders face. So I think 6,500 teachers is an ambitious target, and it's certainly one that at ASCL we recognise and stand behind. But again, you share news of the target at the autumn leadership conferences, and the response from members is, but what does that actually mean in real terms? We're struggling to recruit to certain subjects in secondary, and in some areas, primary are also struggling. If you're a coastal school, perhaps a small rural school, there are, as Jack's alluded to, that target is one thing, but then making sure that it's distributed into the areas that most need that recruitment, I think, is the key thing.
So I reckon the 6,500 pledge from the government at the election was a real recognition of the pressure in the system. Where are we in terms of reaching that? Well, we do have 2,300 more secondary teachers and special teachers, but we have 3,000 fewer primary teachers. So actually there's fewer teachers in the system currently. So what we don't have is extra resource, which is very much needed. And what does that look like on the ground? Well, that means we've got a million children at the moment being taught in class sizes of 31 or more. The student teacher ratio in England is actually one of the highest in the OECD. But we do have an opportunity to change that, because of course there is a declining pupil roll, and the last Labour government in the 2000s, when faced with a declining pupil roll, used that as an opportunity to bring class sizes down, and that's certainly what we would like to see, because there are real issues in the system at the moment around student behaviour and student engagement. A smaller class size would make that much more manageable for teachers. but we do have to really deal with some of the day-to-day issues that are facing the profession. As I said previously, the profession does not feel better under this government at the moment, and they really, really need to. And there's some things that we can do that I think are quite simple. Firstly, I think we should recognise that teaching is a gendered profession, that 3/4 of the profession are female. A catalogue of policies on endometriosis, on menopause, on maternity that were rolled out and enforced across every school would be some way to improving things for the majority female workforce. I mean, maternity for an issue. If you look at the DFE, they get 26 weeks full pay. A teacher will get 4 weeks full pay plus then a series of half pay and statutory maternity pay. It's pretty dire. I think that would be a simple, cost-effective measure that would improve retention in particular.
Thank you. And a couple of you mentioned kind of what needs to happen or what we have to ensure is the case at the end of well, I don't imagine there'll ever be an end to this, but certainly of this concerted effort to recruit. Would any of you like to share any thoughts on the progress so far on that, and whether you are convinced that this is gaining the traction that it needs to?
With the target, meeting the target, you mean? So I think it's going well. With, as Daniel said, 2,500 more teachers in the key areas identified. That's positive. I think the positive recruitment figures are likely to mean there's a further increase next year, plus an increase from further education. So I think all of that is positive. What I worry about is the slightly longer term, that we kind of hit that target and then fall away. So, for example, the government has decided to reduce a number of the bursaries for initial teacher training this year, so that will affect people who are applying now for next September and then entering the labour market the following September. So it feels a distant way in terms of them entering the profession, getting counted in the census, getting counted towards its target, but then reducing those bursaries, so therefore counting against that kind of attractiveness of the profession. So yes, more are currently coming in because of the kind of opportunities that are out there in the wider labour market, but we know how effective bursaries are for increasing recruitment and also retaining those additional teachers. So it's not just a short-term thing. Those additional teachers do get retained in the profession. So there's a risk of short-termism, basically, that you kind of meet the short-term target but don't address the kind of issues for the long term and make sure that pay is competitive long term, that workload is manageable long term, to make sure that those teachers are coming in attracted and in the long term retained.
No pressure to say anything, but if anyone did want the opportunity, that's fine. We can.
Peter, briefly.
I think we'll return to the 6,500 target, but I just wanted to come in on the back of what Daniel was talking about in terms of the particular challenge in retaining women teachers in their 30s. I think some estimations the biggest cohort leaving the profession. So just put it to the rest of the panel, what more can we do to increase retention in this particular cohort?
So, I mean, there are so many challenges for women working in the education system, and not just the challenges that Daniel's mentioned. We've got a huge pay disparity between female and male school leaders. If we're talking, as Daniel's rightly said, about a sector that has more women than it does men, it's crazy that we've still got more men in CEO positions or head teacher positions than women. So I think there are challenges around pay, challenges around supporting women to be able to serve in a system that doesn't discriminate against them, and changes that they'll go through at different stages, not to mention then choices around having a family and whether they feel that that's a viable decision whilst also then having a career. And it strikes me that for women continuously, and this is never more true than in education, you have to make a choice. Am I actually going to continue to really focus on my career, or am I going to focus on having a family? Or the third answer is, am I going to try and do all of that and just become incredibly frazzled? I look at colleagues, I look at my sisters, and the third option is not a viable choice anymore. This is an education system that's built on a huge amount of discretionary effort, but it's getting to the point where people have got no choice any longer than to make a choice that's best for them, their family circumstances. But I also want to talk about women who perhaps don't have a family, because I think they can get missed here as well. There are, a considerable number of factors that are contributing to more women deciding that actually this is just not a sustainable career for them. And I think that there needs to be a really joined up conversation about how we can support that particular group of the workforce, and not to the detriment of men either, because they also have to they have the same they're working in the same sort of conditions, but it's a huge challenge, and it's definitely a concern to us.
Yeah, I think it's a really important group to think about. So they are one of the, if you cut by age and gender, they're the largest group of leavers, women in their 30s, but also that's primarily because they're the largest group of teachers in the profession. So actually the leaving rate is relatively low, but nonetheless, because of that large size, that is an important group to think about in terms of the number of teachers that we're leaving. But also I've seen some kind of compelling evidence that an organisation called MTPT Project got from the Department for Education and their school workforce census, really showing that there is a high leaving rate in the year after women go on maternity leave. So I think addressing the challenges there is really important, because you potentially lose a teacher because for having a child, which is not a good situation to be in. We need to be retaining those teachers long term. It should be possible to return to work and continue to working in a sustainable job, because it's about, is the workload manageable? And teachers working long hours, if you're a young teacher who's just qualified, then maybe you've got the time in your life to be able to commit to those hours. But when with other responsibilities, that's when the personal pressure on teachers really tells, and we end up losing too many teachers who should be supported through that, through flexible working. But it's not just about flexible working. It should be possible to choose to work full time and be supported through that, and have a sustainable workload and a work-life balance, and deal with all the other responsibilities of being a parent, and a parent of young children. So it is a very important area to look at in terms of retaining those teachers, because chances are they'll stay for the long term.
Yeah, so not only are women in their 30s the biggest group who are exiting the profession, but what's becoming an increasingly common experience, because teaching is no longer compatible with family life, is that teachers, after having children, are dropping a day a week or going part-time, but to essentially work full-time. So to do their other tasks on their non-working days, so that they can have a weekend and quality family time. I think one measure that would really help retain teachers would be to increase non-contact time, PPA, to 20%. Teachers in England and Wales actually have an incredibly high amount of teaching time relative to their planning and preparation time. So an increase in PPA would make a real material difference. Everyone around this table cares about equity and standards, but it's the education systems that are able to retain the experience in their classrooms that have the highest standards and the most equity in the system.
I'll go to Manuela.
Thank you, Chair. And just to put on the record that I was a school governor for many years of a rural school. So following from Darren's questions, early this year the National Audit Office and the Public Accounts Committee raised concerns about the lack of detail surrounding the 6,500 teacher target / pledge. Do you share these concerns? And what further information would be helpful for the government to provide? So if I start with Jack.
Thank you. Yes, so I think it's It's taken a long time to get a definition, which has been problematic for just understanding what it is that we're supposed to be achieving as a sector and what the kind of focus is. I think it becoming increasingly clear that it's kind of focused on secondary. I think it's a good thing. It's focused on the number of teachers, so it includes retention as well as just recruitment of new teachers into initial teacher training, which makes sense. But the thing that's outstanding now is the government's plan for delivery, and that's been delayed again to the new year. So, it's taken a long time to get a plan to delivery, and we still haven't seen it. So and I was also saying to Darren earlier that because of the way the kind of flows into the profession work, the teachers that are going to deliver that target are already training, already thinking about training, or already in the profession and thinking about whether or not to leave. So the action needs to happen now, but we still don't have a delivery plan. So I think the two are completely out of whack in terms of the timing. To achieve it by the end of the Parliament, stuff needs to have happened a year ago.
Yeah, I would agree with what Jack said. I think there's a question here around transparency and making sure that there is a clear action plan so that everybody understands, as Jack said, what the delivery looks like, the implementation of that delivery. So I think that is something that we have certainly asked questions about, and similarly to Jack, are sort of waiting to see, really.
Yeah, so in terms of the monitoring, we certainly feel that that's a bit of cherry picking at the moment. As just to recap, 2,500 more teachers in secondary and special, but 3,000 fewer in primary, so fewer teachers in the system in total. And that means that we're essentially, moving around resource. But what was the purpose of the pledge? It was about reducing pressure on the system, and that's what we think that should be really, really monitored.
Yeah. Thank you. In fact, my next question was about how the government should monitor progress on this target. And so does the panel have any suggestion on what measures or data sources the government should use to monitor, to inform the monitoring of the target?
I think the main data sources will be the kind of censuses of teachers in terms of just counting the number of teachers. So I think that will continue, and that should be the main source of monitoring progress on the overall target. But I think it's really important to measure things that are underneath that. So, how are we doing on the flows of initial teacher training? So we had the census a couple of weeks ago, so that's showing some positive improvements of new teachers coming through. We monitor the applications data, so there's the new applicants coming through for next year. So we keep an eye on the kind of monitoring those things that happen underneath as well, that will inform the kind of future number of teachers once it becomes measured. But also not just the kind of the numbers in and the numbers out and the flows of teachers across the system as a kind of set of statistics, but also how teachers are feeling and that kind of sense of their experience of the profession. So the government's Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders survey, I think, is a really important resource, a survey of 10,000 plus teachers every year that's representative and has a constant set of measures. So that has also been showing some improvements as well in some areas. So working hours for full-time teachers reducing, for example, some small increases in job satisfaction, admittedly from a relatively low base. So it's important to measure these things as well, just in terms of are we going in the right direction in terms of supporting the profession to retain the profession, increasing job satisfaction, which we know will matter. So continuing to monitor that is very important as well.
Anyone else? No?
Go to Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sticking with the theme of retention then, and to plug the holes in the bucket that you were talking about earlier, Daniel, I think one of the reasons that I stayed in teaching for 8.5 years is that I had excellent training right at the start, from Teach First, from the mentors in school, from the NQT programme as it was known then. So my question really is for Kathryn and for Daniel. To what extent is the initial teacher training and early career framework as it exists now supporting retention in school and supporting retaining those teachers at the early stages of their career?
I think broadly speaking, it's probably important for me to say that I've been involved in several aspects of this, both in terms of designing the early career framework and then working for the Teaching School Hub Council, implementing that policy area. I would say, broadly speaking, thinking about members at ASCL, there has been a really positive response. There have been challenges that have already been noted around workload, but essentially the challenge has always been workload. That's not necessarily an ECF issue. I think it still remains, though, that even with revisions so that we now have the CCF, ECF, and we have that alignment from ITT into early career teaching, it's so dependent upon the implementation of that, the quality of mentors in school, the quality of the provider, making sure that we are responding to the needs of the early career teachers, and also thinking about to join up with initial teacher training. There have been challenges over repetition, and that's required the workforce to understand that it's not necessarily about just repeating the same thing, but it's about really deepening and broadening your understanding. Lots of opportunity for deliberate practice. So I am a firm believer that the early career framework itself is doing tremendous good, but I think the challenge then is in supporting those early career teachers in that school environment. So they're going to end up in a variety of different schools with different cultures, different ways of working. So it's making sure that actually, even though the training is a lot more robust than we've ever had before, there are still going to be variations because it still is dependent upon the leadership support that you have back in your school environment.
Just before I bring Daniel in, could you elaborate on those workload issues? How do we solve that?
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? Making sure that we are finding a better balance between early career teachers accessing the national programme of early induction, whilst also then recognising they will have day-to-day challenges just because of the very nature of teaching, so marking, planning and preparation. I think it's making sure that the quality of mentoring supports early career teachers with time management. I think that still is one of our biggest challenges, and it's certainly, when I was an early classroom teacher, something that it took a while for me to be able to get my head around. So I think it's about having really sensible policies and making sure that actually that school culture, the working environment, is in support of ongoing career life development, removing any unnecessary burdens, but also really listening to early career teachers and listening to the feedback and how they are finding things and being able to then make some adjustments.
Okay, thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, so it's our view that the frameworks and their content aren't really the major issue. So like you, when I was a young teacher, it was mentoring from experienced colleagues that really developed me and got me through my career. But we've got an issue in the sense that we've hemorrhaged a lot of experience from our classroom. So we are still losing quite a lot of trainees. So a quarter of postgraduate trainees and a third of undergraduate trainees are not within the state sector after 16 months. Now, mentoring is highly valued by ECTs, but the picture is patchy. So I know of colleagues who are being mentored at ECT 1 by an ECT 2, and this is highly problematic. What we really do need is more staff with more space to allow that mentoring to happen. So, more time for mentors to have away from planning and preparation. That's really what's necessary.
Can I just come in there, please? Because I think there's a broader challenge here about professional development in general. I think, arguably, over the last decade, we've made huge strides with professional development, our understanding of what quality professional development looks like and how to then design and implement that at scale. But as Daniel's just said, the number one challenge is still time, and that then exacerbates workload issues. So I completely agree with what Daniel said about mentoring. It's freeing up funded time for mentors to be able to really develop early career teachers in a way that they don't feel it's just another thing that they have to do on their to-do list. And I think, to go to your earlier point around workload and early career teachers, if you're in a school environment where your workload feels insurmountable, then the early career framework, the training that you're having also feels like another thing to do on your to-do list. So it's quality time, it's valuing the professional development, and then seeing that through every stage of a teacher and leader's career.
Yeah.
Also, to add, what's not helping is that there's been a real increase in sort of precarious and short-term contracts. So if you're an ECT entering a school and the contract ends before your induction's completed, it doesn't really give you faith that your employer or indeed the system is going to develop you over the long term.
Well, the evidence you've given today on mentors certainly lines up with the anecdotal experience I have of mentors, because it certainly helped me. Just as an aside then, before we move on to the next question, we've also heard evidence that some teachers really like it when schools say that their children can attend that school if they come and teach there and if they stay teaching there. Have you heard anything about this?
Only anecdotally. It's certainly something that is supported, yeah.
Again, only anecdotally.
No problem. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we will go back to Manuela.
Thank you. And my question is for Jack. Okay, my question. So how effective are financial incentives, such as bursaries and scholarships and retention payments, in improving teacher recruitment and retention? And we know that some bursaries have been reduced quite a lot in certain subjects, so that might be an issue for concerns. But yes, if you could.
Yeah, indeed. So we know there's a growing body of evidence showing that financial incentives are important and change can affect teachers' behaviour. So bursaries, for example, increasing bursaries is then associated with an increase in the number of trainees coming into that subject. So that's very clear through years and years of data that happens. There's been a lot of change, so you can kind of assess that change. And we also looked at retention of those teachers subsequently, because there's often a worry about, you give lots of money to a trainee who then trains and then goes, oh, see you later, I'm off to do something else. They enter the state sector at the same rate and are retained at the same rate as everyone else. So it seems like an increase in a bursary will increase the number of trainees coming in and permanently the number of teachers in that cohort. So, they are really powerful, really cost effective. And also, importantly, can be targeted at subjects that are particularly in need. So they are at a very high level at the moment for physics, maths, chemistry, computing, lower for other subjects, especially after reductions. But so it's important that resources can be directed at those particular subjects in a targeted way to improve recruitment and retention in those subjects.
Will you be monitoring the impact of any reduction in bursaries? So, for example, biology has gone quite. It was reduced, I think, 80%. So, it's. Are you going to monitor whether?
We absolutely will be monitoring that. So we keep an eye on the applications data. It's early on in the season, in the kind of cycle, and we've only had one bit of data, but already there's a kind of difference between those subjects that are that had their bursary reduced. Yeah. And these are kind of art subjects, art and design, music, the kind of subjects that the curriculum review was kind of suggesting might be a kind of areas of growth. But at the same time, particularly for music, which is already below target, even though the number of trainees has increased this year, seems a disjointed decision in terms of the long-term kind of needs of the sector and recruiting teachers in the subjects where they're needed.
Yes, and also languages as well have gone down.
And languages, exactly.
But from your experience, these financial incentives are delivering sustained improvements in attracting new teachers into the profession, but also keeping experienced teachers. So retain that expertise.
Well, so they're not designed. So bursaries, for example, are not designed to retain experienced teachers. So I don't think they'll have an impact. But I mean, in the very long term, those additional teachers who are brought in by bursaries are likely to stay for the long term. Or at least some of them. There is attrition, teachers leave, but ultimately it's contributing to more teachers than it would otherwise. There are also financial incentives aimed at early career teachers. which are targeted in these kind of particular shortage subjects. So again, kind of being able to target at the subjects that particularly need retention. And they are targeted at early career teachers where retention turnover tends to be higher among those groups. There is some evidence that they do improve retention as well. Again, that won't necessarily affect the more experienced teachers. Their retention rates tend to be better, but I think that's just because of the nature of experience and once you're in. But what we've really seen is, at the same period over the last 15 years, an erosion in the level of competitiveness of experienced teachers' pay. So average earnings have grown by kind of, in real terms, 7% since 2010. But experienced teachers is 9% lower in real terms than it was compared to 2010.
Yeah.
And if it had kept pace with average earnings, then the pay of an experienced teacher would be £9,000 higher. So there's been a real erosion of experienced teachers' pay, despite having relatively high retention rates compared to those early career teachers. It could be even higher if the competitiveness of teachers' pay had kept up over that period.
So my next question is actually what can be done to improve these incentives and maximize their impact. So one of the things is actually to tackle pay erosion for experienced teachers. Yes. And anything else that we can look at.
So I think that is right. But obviously there's a constrained fiscal environment. And so thinking about the balance between those targeted incentives and the design of those targeted incentives as well. So, broadening out, for example, the early career retention payments to be all teachers in those subjects would support the, retention of more experienced teachers in those subjects, but still targeting on those subjects. I think there's a balance to be made in terms of cost effectiveness when increasing pay to address that erosion. I think it is important in terms of having a long-term career pathway that isn't, constantly being eroded in real terms. But at the same time, that pay isn't differentiated by subject. It is for all teachers, and the system currently has enough for PE teachers and history teachers, and in other subjects, primary teachers. So I think there's a balance there between the level of targeting to particularly look at those subjects that are struggling, but also not losing sight of the fact that the general attractiveness and competitiveness of teachers' pay matters for every teacher's decision to enter.
Go to Chris for some more questions on the...
Yeah, just carrying on the topic of pay. I felt I should also declare an interest as the husband of a teacher who's just got on maternity leave, so I thought I should, going on to Daniel's point earlier. What do we think future pay awards need to do to ensure that teacher remains attractive but also competitive, in your view, or anyone's view?
So we do need to see a correction in teacher pay to allow it to be competitive as a graduate profession amongst the rest of the economy, as Jack has already pointed. The bursaries, for example, they do have some use, but 4 in 5 postgraduate trainees received a bursary last year in 24-25, and we still have a recruitment and retention crisis. We really can't avoid the system-wide response, which is a correction in teacher pay. It's also very important that those pay awards are funded as well as being restorative. One thing that is really impacting the profession is the feeling that they just can't complete the job in the day, because there's been a series of unfunded pay awards in which support staff have often been cut from their schools. Their class sizes have increased, and that's made the day much harder. So what we really do need to see is, over the course of this Parliament, a correction in teacher pay, but also that it is fully funded in terms of those pay awards.
On the point of fully funded, is there a danger that if it's not fully funded, obviously then the school themselves have to find some of that funding, and things like PPA potentially are cut, and obviously that has an additional impact on retention?
So honestly, when I'm talking to teachers at the moment now, they're talking to me that the job is as hard as it's ever been. And that is because there have been a series of unfunded or partially funded pay awards in which every year teachers are being asked to do that little bit more with a little bit less. And we are now, in a crisis. Just give you some examples. I know a teacher, it's been corrected now, but the toilet next door to them was broken for months, so they just stopped drinking water in the day. I know teachers who are having an hour added onto their morning routine because 2 out of 3 of the photocopiers are broken. This is the impact of underinvestment in education, and we need to see a shift.
Just one more for me. Just on the cost of living, but particularly housing costs. And I've heard some pretty horror stories on this, but do you think there's a particular issue in areas like London? This is on my sheet, it's South East, but it'd be remiss of me not to mention the eastern regions. I represent it.
Devon as well?
Yeah. I'm sure there's lots of
as long as you mention the South East.
Yeah. But is our housing costs in whatever region affecting teacher retention? Because that is a serious consideration for teachers.
So in terms of where pay is on the agenda of concern for teachers, we survey and talk to our members all the time. There is certainly a geographical difference, and that's down to the cost of living, the cost of housing in particular. So, pay is much higher on the agenda of issues of concern for teachers in London and the South East in particular. What unites all teachers around the country, though, is the disappointment in school funding generally, and they certainly view the partial funding of pay awards as an issue. Every teacher in the country recognises when there's a partially funded pay award, they might see an increase in their pay, but there's going to make their job harder at the same time, and so we do need to see some action to address that.
Other witnesses want to come in. Yeah.
It's definitely an issue around Oxfordshire as well, where I'm based. Teachers have told me that, and yes, it is an issue because there's less of a London weighting, and also we did some research a few years ago looking at London, and I mean London's 10% weighting. It's not a big difference when the housing costs difference is very large. So yes, I think it is a big issue, especially for less experienced teachers who obviously aren't paid as much as they work through the main pay scale. But yeah, the solution is pay teachers more, rather than a housing policy solution. I think it is an issue in terms of cost.
Can I just drill down on that question a little bit more? So I think the thing that we were keen to explore is, as well as we talk about recruitment in and retention out of the profession, I think that the question that we're keen to drill into is whether there is a particular retention issue for teachers remaining in the profession but choosing to move to more affordable areas of the country to continue working in the profession as a separate dynamic that contributes to the pressures within particular. So certainly anecdotally within my constituency, which is the London constituency, I know of teachers who first of all tell me that they've moved out of London but are continuing to work at the school, and within a year, 18 months, they're not working in that school anymore, but they are still within the teaching profession. And it just because it's a complicated dynamic of movement, the specific role of high housing costs in some parts of the country.
Yeah, we've seen that in our research, that particularly teachers in their 30s moving out of London to move to other areas. So still remaining within the system, but moving out of high cost areas. That's certainly the evidence we've seen, yeah.
So I think you should look at the retention picture as dire nationally, but there are different reasons why teachers will exit the profession in different localities. So, in London, pay and the cost of living might be an issue, in the South East and so on. But then in areas of great deprivation where the cost of living is cheaper, also really struggling to retain teachers because of other issues such as high accountability, high levels of pupil need and not enough resource to deal with it. So look at it as a dire picture nationally, but the reasons in each locality might be slightly different.
We'll go to Peter now.
Thank you. We have already talked a lot this morning about teacher workload, but I thought helpful to really boil down into the specific challenges that are driving that. I think we often talk about teacher workload as a monolithic thing, but actually day to day there are lots of specific challenges that teachers are facing that are affecting that overall workload. So what are the sort of the key issues that are driving up that workload, Kathryn?
I think workload, as you've just alluded to, is a really nebulous topic, and it means different things to different people. Some of the greatest challenges that our members feed back to us remain around behaviour. So it's not just about the actual physical activities that people might be experiencing in school, it's also the emotional load that's then contributing to their workload. So increasingly members talk about some really challenging situations with behaviour, with students, with members of their community. It's very well documented that there are huge challenges for schools in terms of SEND and inclusion provision and being able to serve students' needs and making sure that they have resources to do that. I think that safeguarding and attendance more broadly is increasing teacher and leadership workload. And then there are always going to be administrative and accountability burdens. And there are obviously things that the Department for Education has tried to do to mitigate against those, such as the workload charter and encouraging schools to sign up to that. But fundamentally, is that making a difference day in, day out to the lives of teachers and leaders? I would be of the opinion probably not, because when you are faced with such challenges, you have to deal with them there and then. I think in terms of the new curriculum, that is going to obviously present more work for schools, even though we welcome some of the changes that will be taking place in terms of what the review has put forward. Essentially, we want to get to a place where teachers and leaders aren't having to spend all of their time on really low-level administrative tasks because of the accountability trail. I think that really drives a lot of workload challenges in the school environment. But it is a really nebulous concept, and it's similar to well-being, because that often gets tied up into the workload conversations as well. And what might be good for my well-being could be very different from all of us in this room, and that's the challenge, isn't it?
Neil?
So in terms of workload, the number one thing that our members are telling us is it's not only about the number of hours, but it's the intensity of the work that's required of teachers currently. And the primary driver and number one driver of workload at the moment is pupil need and behaviour. The Secretary of State's made some real welcome moves this week around pupil need, and the 50,000 extra SEND places and the £3 billion of investment. That is really, really welcome, but that's going to take some time to work through the system. In terms of pupil behaviour, nobody around this table should sort of see it as a surprise. We came out of the pandemic. There was a real failure to invest in post-pandemic recovery by the previous government. Children, who would want to be a child these days with, social media and technology? It's no wonder that we've got a real crisis in behaviour at the moment. And that is certainly, it's moving up quite rapidly, the issues that should be prioritised by our members at the moment. And that's why I do think we should really take this opportunity of the declining pupil roll to reduce class sizes, because that makes managing behaviour much easier.
That's really interesting to hear in the context of a government that's about to set out some reforms to the SEND system. It's interesting to hear about that. Obviously, really important for young people themselves with those additional needs, but also for the teaching community. I also wanted to ask specifically about AI, because there are those who suggest, I think not all of them have actually ever set foot in a classroom, but there are those who suggest that AI is the panacea, the silver bullet that's going to help address teacher workload. I've slightly suggested there in the way that I framed this question what I think about that, but it's not about what I think. What do your members think about this? Jack, did you want to start on this?
I can start.
I saw your hand, so I called on you.
The reason, so I was as sceptical as you recently. At NFER we conducted a randomised controlled trial of teachers using ChatGPT for their planning time. Planning time is one of the areas where teachers say they spend too much time doing it, around 40% at the moment. And yes, I think there's a real danger of kind of, offloading the kind of intellectual work of being a teacher and just saying, the computer will do it. But actually, there were several really interesting findings from this randomised controlled trial. One was it did reduce teachers' planning time by around 30%. So that is quite impressive in terms of the use of it. But what I was most impressed with was the ways that teachers were using it. So it wasn't, here computer, design me a lesson and then just kind of pick it up and go. It was reducing the kind of grunt work of planning and actually freeing up time to engage with the intellectual exercise of planning, thinking about what pupils had shown in the previous lesson and thinking about how to build on that in the next lesson. And actually the tedious time-consuming bit is, make a quiz about this. So actually teachers were using it on particular areas where it was more kind of the mundane aspect of planning and actually retaining that time for the intellectual exercise of it. So I was actually quite optimistic about the ways teachers were using it in that study, because they had a kind of the support to be able to use it. I think that's really important. Good policies that schools have in terms of appropriate uses of it, making sure things are checked, because it's not always the most accurate thing. But it showed some decent potential that was more than just saving a bit of time.
What strikes me about that is that's how anyone who is using AI to improve their efficiency is using AI to help take out some of the administrative burden, but with the creative stuff still being very much human-led. Very interesting. Daniel?
So, a lot of our members are using artificial intelligence at the moment. We know that we are at the moment, trying to ascertain how the profession is using artificial intelligence. We do have real concerns around deprofessionalisation, and anecdotally, I know early career mentors who are, working with ECTs, and planning is being done through artificial intelligence. So that is a real concern around deprofessionalisation. But look, we should look at artificial intelligence like any other form of automation. And all other historic forms of automation have not reduced workload, and we don't think it will over the long term in education, because we have a high stakes system of accountability. So you might reduce time in one area, but it's going to get filled up with another area. What I would love the Education Select Committee to do, though, is have some more sort of investigation into actually what does artificial intelligence mean for teaching and learning over the long term. What is teaching and learning going to be like in the next 5 years, when a child who's 13 can ask ChatGPT to write them an essay on Shakespeare in the style of a 13-year-old and then submit it? Because I've got real concerns actually around artificial intelligence over the long term and cognitive decline for children. And I think that we have to really get ahead of that, and that's what I'd appeal for you to all look into.
And I would say, we are asking you the questions today. You can watch this space for developments in that in that area without giving too much away. Kathryn, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say, similarly to what Daniel's just said, certainly when we've spoken to our members, I think ensuring that artificial intelligence is used for, what was Jack's phrase, the grunt work, I like that, Jack, is one thing. And I think we want to reduce the grunt work, don't we? Because that's often where, to your question, the workload tensions are. People are spending time on things because they're ticking boxes or because of accountability audits. Dare we say Ofsted are going to be checking certain things. So I think artificial intelligence should be used as a way of carrying the load for things that actually people are wasting their time and energy on, that actually automation could be a better way of managing those particular tasks. So to Daniel's point around creativity, I think there's a moral imperative here that we should be ensuring that we aren't creating generations of children and young people who are just defaulting to ChatGPT. We had that issue with Google, didn't we? There was a campaign about a decade ago around why can't you just ask Google, actually, because there are lots of challenges there in terms of the answers that you get. So I think it would be helpful to really take a very broad look at where artificial intelligence can actually provide some gains in terms of workload, but where it perhaps then can have a detrimental effect. And I think creativity, creative thinking is one of the biggest areas that leaders are most concerned around.
Thank you. So just briefly going back to the workload question, the department did launch a school workload reduction task force under the previous government in July 2023, which published some recommendations in January last year. So I just wonder if I could ask you whether you think the government should implement any of those, any or all of those recommendations, and maybe you could just sort of summarise the workload discussion by telling us what your top 2 or 3 silver bullets would be to actually try and resolve this workload crisis. I'll start with you, Jack.
I think it had some good recommendations, I think, to take up. But I think one of the things that was a shame with the task force is kind of got overtaken by events slightly with the change of government, and actually the areas identified for the final set of recommendations, which I reminded myself last night, were the unintended consequences of accountability, including inspection, school culture and leadership, in-school practice such as behaviour policies, parental expectations and complaints, the impact of pressures on wider public services in schools. These are the really important issues, like Kathryn's just been saying, in terms of how teachers are feeling workload at the moment. I think there has been some progress in terms of reducing planning time, or making planning time more manageable, and on marking as well. So the data shows some improvements in terms of the proportion of teachers saying they spend too much time on those issues. But it's issues around behaviour and the support from external support services that are really driving teachers' workload in recent years. I think that needs to be the focus. So it's a shame that the task force got curtailed before making recommendations on those really critical areas.
I think for us, we recognise that workload is a system issue as opposed to individual school issues. And I think that, just to Jack's point when he was listing off the recommendations, which we also went and had a look at, for me, I think school culture and leadership underpins all of those that Jack's just listed. And there is a lot that still needs to be done to really understand what we mean by culture, another really nebulous topic. But there are some schools and multi-academy trusts that are doing some really good work, that have definitely worked hard to try to reduce unnecessary tasks and burdens on teachers' time. But they are in pockets, and it's trying to then think about how policy and initiatives from the department can shine a light on those, but do so in a way that people can understand what might be applicable to their school context and perhaps potentially what might not work. So the fundamental thing with workload and initiatives and recommendations is, but what does it look like implemented on the ground in different areas, in different schools, in different regions? And I think we have to move away from a one-size-fits-all, because that's a phrase that's often used but very rarely then implemented within a policy. And I understand why, but I think we want to get to a place where we've got a really clear understanding of those workload challenges, of the wellbeing challenges, because I think they're really interlinked. And then we have a very clear implementation plan, because a wellbeing charter, as an example, is a step in the right direction to recognise that actually wellbeing and workload needs to be prioritised. But it isn't anything then that affects the actual day-to-day lived reality of teachers and leaders, because it's dependent upon whether or not that school actually decides to make a difference. And then we end up unpacking why people might not have made any changes, and we come back to accountability and high stakes and trying to have a really robust evidence trail, because you're under pressure, because Ofsted might come and suddenly you have to produce all of this information, irrespective of whether Ofsted say that they want schools to produce or not produce extra work. I've been in 12 Ofsted inspections as a teacher and a school leader. There's a considerable amount of work, not just in that inspection, but in the day-to-day lived reality of being a teacher and a leader.
So the workload reduction task force made some useful recommendations, but what more is to be done? At the moment, actually, we've got some concerns about the government's direction of travel on directed time in 1265 in terms of the contracted hours. Obviously, they've submitted evidence that have asked the pay review body to review this. Teaching's a professional endeavour, and teachers are essentially taking jobs where they are expected to work an untold amount of unpaid overtime. So we would like to see actually 1265 to be made enforceable and teachers to be compensated when they go over, and that there was a limit to the amount of hours that teachers worked. This is what happens in Scotland, in Iceland, in Portugal, and they have better teacher well-being and lower attrition.
Thank you.
You go to Chris.
Yeah, let's go back to something that's very dear to my heart, which is welfare of teachers. The Education Support Wealth Index published last month, which characterised teacher well-being as being in crisis. How would you, obviously you've kind of touched upon it a bit, but how would you assess the current situation and kind of what further steps that you haven't perhaps already outlined would you like to see the government take to strengthen its support for the workforce?
Yeah. They are right to point to a crisis. Whilst we've seen positive steps in terms of recruitment, retention is still woeful, and that is down to a crisis in teacher well-being. As you know, we have to make teaching a profession that is again compatible with family life. We'd like to see an increase in non-contact time, planning and preparation time in particular. But whenever we talk to members and indeed survey members en masse, they primarily feel not valued by government. And when we have evidence submitted to the pay review body that is pointing to a 6.5% pay award spread over 3 years to come out of existing school budgets, that really does not do anything for the morale of teachers. As I said, the Secretary of State has made some real positive steps in regards to SEND, to child poverty, but until we see the day-to-day lives of teachers and support staff improve, we're not going to solve this problem.
Thank you. And finally, for this panel, to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning back to behaviour, we talked about it earlier. Again, when I was a teacher, when I was head of maths, I didn't lose a single one of my maths teachers. A record I'm very proud of to this day. I was the first person to leave my school and my department, and that was to do this job. And one of the reasons was that when I trained my staff, I was very clear with them. In those first 2 weeks, I almost don't care if you teach maths, it was an exaggeration. I care much more that you have behaviour under control and that you establish relationships with your students. That is the most important thing, and I attribute that small success to that. Now, we've heard very recently in the Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders survey that behaviour has been cited more and more as a reason that teachers are leaving the profession. We've also heard the Education Secretary point to figures that show behaviour in schools is improving, so there are potentially green shoots there too. What's your view on this? Is it a deterrent, and how can we solve it? And I'm going to start with Kathryn, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's certainly a key topic when we speak to our members that they put forward as a reason for challenges within their school environment, their own personal stress as leaders. I think your point around relationships is a really key one. I wonder if we are now in a time where people feel so pressurised to be moving through the curriculum, ensuring that as soon as children are entering or students are entering the classroom, we're straight into instruction. I think there is a danger that we have reduced the opportunity to build up some of those relationships. I think it's a balance. I think that there is also, based on feedback from our members, increasing challenges within the home and school contract. And I think that the pandemic exacerbated some of those challenges. And then post-pandemic, there's never enough time in education to press pause, to sort of course correct, to recalibrate, to have a really thorough understanding of where the needs are, and then make those adjustments to be responsive, because you keep going, because obviously those children and young people only get one shot at their education. So time is a real issue. It's been mentioned a lot this morning. I think that are pockets probably across the country based on our membership of green shoots, of good practice. I think the behaviour hubs where they're working well are really supporting schools to make some of those changes. But I think we have to invest beyond the schools. I think schools are absorbing all of society's challenges, and that really needs to be addressed, because ultimately now you speak to school leaders, what are they spending their time and effort on? It's not teaching and learning, it's not professional development of their staff, it's dealing with the societal challenges. And I'll give you some examples. Our members cite dealing with people's disputes with neighbours, issues around parking, supporting people with passport applications, supporting people to get elderly relatives from Pakistan over to this country because there's a poorly child, finding out that there are X number of children living in a house that aren't registered anywhere. I could go on. You know, there are real challenges, and you hear snapshots on the news, but it's only when you talk to leaders that these are actually challenges that they're dealing with day in, day out. And I don't think a report or a survey can ever really capture that. So as ever, we've got to really dig into the detail, because people are finding it increasingly hard to spend the time on teaching and learning curriculum, because you've got other challenges that are far more pressing, which then exacerbates well-being, workload, the emotional load. There's a question around, should we be supporting school leaders with supervision, for example, because some of the challenges that they're dealing with are just unimaginable.
And conscious that we are 10 minutes over. Daniel, can you just finish on this point?
So yeah, in terms of behaviour, I mean, who would want to be a child these days? They've just come out of the pandemic. There was not the investment in recovery. We're seeing a rise in SEND need, particularly. Child poverty has risen, although the government have taken some real positive steps to correct this. But also, children are on technology and social media 5 hours a day. They're sat in front of screens far too much, and then we expect them to go into a classroom and be able to manage and behave. The experience that we're hearing from our members is that they feel like the fourth emergency service at the moment, that all of the other areas of support that are around families have been stripped away, and they're just having to deal with more with much less. What our members are saying they would really like is smaller class sizes, a much more flexible curriculum, but also funding to ensure that there is the resource available in school to support behaviour needs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I thank all of you for coming to give your evidence to us this morning? It's been a very interesting first session. If there's anything that you felt you were not able to adequately convey in the time that we had, please do write to the committee afterwards. We'd certainly welcome that. But thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome to the second half of our deep dive oral evidence session on teacher recruitment and retention. Can I welcome our second panel of witnesses this morning and invite you to introduce yourselves to us, starting with James Toop.
Hi, morning everyone. I'm James Toop, Chief Executive of Teach First. or a national education charity, we run the High Potential Initial Teacher Training Programme, which we've been running in partnership with the Department for Education for about 20 years, have placed nearly 25,000 teachers through that programme. We also run a SCIT and other MPQ and ECF programmes as well.
Melanie Renowden.
Morning, I'm Melanie Renowden, Chief Executive of the National Institute of Teaching.
Thank you, Graihagh.
Hello, I'm Graihagh, Crawshaw-Sadler. I'm CEO at Now Teach, and we're a charity that focuses on the recruitment and retention of mid to late stage career changers coming into the teaching profession. The average age of our recruits is 48, and our oldest new recruit was 73 this year. So a slightly different demographic to that James is working with.
Thank you, Dr. Green.
Hi, good morning everybody. My name is Jasper Green. I'm Head of Initial Teacher Education at UCL's Institute of Education. We educate about 1,000 teachers each year, so we cover all phases of education: early years, primary, secondary and further education.
Thank you very much and welcome this morning. Can I start by asking each of you, what trends are you observing in teacher recruitment and retention and initial training at the moment? And are there any particular current or future developments that the committee should be aware of? I'll start with James Toop.
Sure. So I think we're seeing at Teach First a similar trend to what the national data is reflecting. So applications are up this year, or last year actually, on 25%. They're up again this year by 22%. We think a lot of that is being driven, yes, by some of the recent pay awards and bursaries, but also by a declining job market in other sectors, which is driving more applications into teaching. Also an increase through AI. So High Flyers research shows that the average graduate now is submitting over 20 job applications. So that's driving up applications. We do know that competition, though, for graduate jobs is very high. So over half of graduates will renege on an offer if they get a better one that comes in, which means that we need to really ensure that teaching is the number one option that they're choosing. We've also seen a similar shift in subjects. So STEM applications have increased. So our cohort this year was 39% STEM against a national average of 23%. And we've seen an increase in maths. So I think Teach First contributed 12% of all maths teachers to the sector against an overall contribution of 6%. Some of what we've seen, I think, that has worked is that you can market and promote teaching as the number one choice for graduates if you've got really high quality campaigns that are targeted, that are high prestige, and also that really show that there's an opportunity through teaching to make a difference. Our research with Public First showed that 86% of graduates do want to make a difference through their jobs, and actually we've got an opportunity here to shift the narrative on teaching and show that it's a profession and a job where actually you can be in person. You don't need to be behind a desk on Teams. You're in person, you're leading, you can see the direct impact that you're making on the children in your classroom. And I think that if we can do more targeted campaigns like that, we can really sort of push teaching up the agenda for graduates.
Thank you. Melanie.
We are seeing applications broadly on track this year with last year, so that's applications that are happening right now for trainees that will start training to teach with us in the summer. Acceptance is actually slightly up, so our trend is the opposite to what we're seeing in the rest of the system, where there's a big increase in applications and slightly lower level of acceptances. So we're pleased about the quality of applications that are continuing to come through to train with us. Emerging trends, so mentor time. I would say mentors. So that we know they're so crucial to both trainee experience and their ability to develop effectively in role and to go on to be successful in sustained careers. That continues through into their early career teaching phase in their first 2 years of teaching. Mentor roles are under pressure. We're losing the experienced members of staff from schools who are our natural mentors. So their time and the supply of mentors, particularly in schools that are serving the most socioeconomically disadvantaged communities, is a challenge. Likewise, placement supply more generally for initial teacher education as well. Having the right numbers of teachers coming through into teaching is, of course, partially a product of the numbers that are applying, but it's also about the provision of placements so that there's schools that they can train to teach in. and the skilled mentors that are in those schools as well. So those are definitely kind of emerging areas of pressure, I would say. Trainee support needs, so numbers of trainees that are requiring adjustments, trends in terms of trainee willingness to travel and ability to travel, financial pressures for trainees as well. Those are really difficult for some trainees to continue with their studies. In terms of schools' ability to support both trainee teachers and then those progressing through their careers and into leadership as well. Schools' ability to keep the sort of bandwidth focus on professional learning in all its forms and to integrate it into school improvement is under a lot of pressure because of all of the factors in sort of wider society that are showing up in schools. So that is continuing to be a pressure for schools, and we're keeping an eye on the sort of trickle-down effects of the changes that are coming out of the Curriculum and Assessment Review and Ofsted, and what that's going to do in terms of the change load for schools and potentially the impact that that's going to have on their ability to support teachers, new teachers and existing teachers. And then I would just say the really important thing I think is also about geographic variance in all of this, like what it looks like in the schools where it is hardest to get and keep skilled teachers, and there is an awful lot of variance in the system as well.
Right.
So it won't surprise you that we're sort of focusing on the mid to late stage demographic entering the teaching profession, so sort of using the over 40s age group as a proxy for potential career changes. And we're interested to note that that group has been growing, so it's grown by 38% since 2022 compared to 10% for the under 40s group. So I think it's the potential of that group. What we're interested to see is that whilst, and great to hear that acceptances are going up at NEOT, I think acceptances for the over 40s is actually lower than the under 40s. So whilst there's potential and a growth in applications, we need to nurture that group to make sure they get through to starting in schools. We're also interested to note, and that sort of with the AI increases, this potentially could increase the pool of people considering a career change into education. We undertook a survey with Slack Adapt of 2,000 people. 40% were worried that AI will affect their job security. 28% of people are thinking that it will mean they actively have to change career. And sort of 3%, if we extrapolate out, potentially up to 1.3 million people might consider education. So for me, it's the potential in that demographic and the fact that we need to think very carefully about how that group can be inspired, nurtured, supported to both come in and be retained, because within that group, certainly from the work that we've done at Now Teach over time with 1,300 recruits since 2017, 60% of that group have been STEM teachers, in comparison to sort of 24% of all postgrad entrants. So there's potential to support STEM challenges through a career changer group with the right support. And to link to some of the points on the previous panel, looking at the sort of male-female statistics, the career changer pool, certainly from our perspective at Now Teach, also has a potential to address that balance, with 51% of our applicants this year being male in comparison to sort of 35% nationally. So we think there's an opportunity with this demographic, and there are certainly green shoots there, but more work is needed to make sure we realise that opportunity.
I mean, I'll echo what many of the members have said already. I think we've seen an improvement over the last 3 years in both applications and those students who go on to enrol. Last year, 15% increase in applications, so that's around 7,000 applicants applying. I think it's worth stating that we have seen bigger increases, around 20% increase on international students versus 13% home. And this year is also looking positive in terms of an increase of 46% in applications this year. What we haven't talked about, I think, is further education early years more broadly, but I think there is something to note nationally around further education and the need there. And early years last year, there was actually an 8% decrease in the recruitment into EYITT.
Just really briefly, based on those analyses, what's your assessment of the feasibility of the government's 6,500 recruitment target for teachers, and is there anything to say about the kind of long-term prospects for recruitment and retention into the profession based on your experience? Again, I'll start with James.
I think the government's heading in the right direction in terms of the teacher recruitment target. I think the question is, as Melanie raised, like whether it's being spread evenly across the system, to which I think the answer at the moment is no. I think we need more focus on ensuring that we attract teachers to the schools that need them most. That's often away from the major cities, into rural coastal areas, post-industrial towns, areas of significant disadvantage. And also in the subjects that we need to recruit the graduates in most, because although some of the targets have been met for certain subjects, that's also because the target has come down in this particular year as well, and we're seeing significant demand in STEM, computing, modern foreign languages for the types of schools that we place, and we place exclusively into schools in low-income communities.
I would say it's got an appropriate amount of ambition to it, although I do think that we need to make sure that we're not missing both the focus on the schools in terms of those serving areas of high socioeconomic disadvantage, also making sure that we're thinking about supplying to special schools as well is really important as part of this. So I welcome the target and think it has the right level of ambition, and we're also making collectively some steady progress towards achieving it. It seems very helpful, I think, to have it as a focal point, but it feels very important that we don't sort of hit the target and miss the point. You've got to have that more granular focus underneath on making sure that the teachers at a national level are hitting the schools and getting to the children where the needs are greatest.
Yes, I would agree with both panellists. I think it's clear and there's progress being made. I feel like we need more detail, and I'm hopeful that will come in January as to what the delivery plan is and how that links to sort of recommendations around triple science in the curriculum and assessment review. And I'm keen to understand sort of almost different demographic groups that the government wants to prioritise coming into schools to really diversify the workforce and support some of that kind of the fact that we have youngest age demographic in the OECD, and what can we be doing to ensure that we're retaining older, more experienced teachers, but also using the opportunity to bring experience in from outside of education.
So in terms of the progress towards the target, I think I'd like to know a little bit more about the target. I'm not sure I do agree that it is necessarily ambitious enough. I think its focus is on number as opposed to the quality as well. I mean, both are important, number and quality of the applicants. So, for example, what are the subject backgrounds of those applicants who are coming into subject-specific routes? What's the route they're training through? What's the degree classification? What areas and schools are these applicants going on to work in? I think I want to go back to what Melanie said around partnership. We talk about availability of placements being a challenge for initial teacher education. Certainly for us, that will limit how far we can recruit further in specific subjects. What we're really talking around is partnership and schools' ability to partner with institutions over long term and to engage in initial teacher education. So I think that is a significant barrier to realising this target of the government's.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you. We've already talked a little about the different pathways into teaching, and it feels clear that if we're going to meet the government's ambitions of recruiting more teachers, more specialist teachers, we are going to have as many routes into the profession as possible. What would you like to see done to increase those different routes into teaching and support different ways to become a trained teacher? James, can we start with you?
Sure. So I think I'd sort of echo what Jasper said about teacher quality being kind of as important as teacher quantity. The high potential initial teacher training route is actually designed to decrease in scale over the next few years. So this year we placed just over 1,400 teachers. That will go down to 1,300 this year. And part of that effort is about trying to say that this particular route, the high potential initial teacher training pathway, is about attracting graduates with leadership potential who otherwise wouldn't have considered teaching, to get them to come and work in the most challenging schools, the lowest income schools and communities in the country. And that reduction in scale is something that we support. I think one thing that will be really helpful for the pathways is actually having more clarity about, for the population coming in, about what is the role and specific purpose of the different pathways. So when you're applying for a skit with a particular trust or a teaching school hub, kind of what does that mean? If you're applying for Teach First, what does that mean for Now Teach, etc.? That there's more kind of clarity on those. And I think understanding that Teach First, for example, is a very intensive, stretching, challenging pathway where you'll be teaching in the job from day one, where there's rigorous screening and selection. So whilst the number of applications have gone up 25%, the size of the cohort has gone up 1%. So we're broadly holding a similar cohort size against an increase in applications. So you need to kind of understand and know those things when you're coming in. And that will also support retention, because you want to get the right people onto the right pathways in a way that matches their ambitions and what they're looking for as well.
Graihagh, I know the government has chosen not to renew the funding for the Career Changes programme you oversee. So what's the future of that pathway?
So in my mind, the Career Changer route remains viable and has huge potential within it, now more than ever. But I think there's a risk that it won't grow without prioritisation and incentives at sort of the individual school and training provider level to understand this group in the way they need to be understood and help them maximise their potential, both in terms of age diversification, of STEM specialism, but also of industry links, some of those critical kind of essential skills that we're now focused on, broader links to the workplace. So I think there's huge potential there. You're right, at the moment we are not, we're sort of operating towards the end of our government contract, and despite recommendations from your predecessors on this committee, current government have yet not adopted that recommendation. We've been encouraged that philanthropists have stepped in for the sort of short to near medium term, so we have some stability for our work, and they have a real sort of intuitive understanding of why this makes sense. So we will be maintaining the number of teachers that we're recruiting, certainly for the next couple of years, at 250 a year. But we have an ambition over the next 4 years to recruit closer to 1,600 of those will be STEM specialists. But we just need to get our funding model in place. So I think that risk that career changers don't convert from application to starting needs to be held in mind. And then that sort of distinct impact that we know that career changers can have. So I would be very keen to see the government kind of making more of this potential group and really setting out their strategy for that demographic in their workforce plans.
Thank you, Chair. The recent postgraduate initial teacher training census presents a fairly positive picture of teacher recruitment, particularly for primary schools, although the secondary school target has only been hit once since 2012-2013. So could you tell us to what extent you believe that this survey aligns with the reality on the ground, and are you confident? Are you as confident as the department appears to be about projections of the future teacher supply? I'll start with you, Jasper.
Yeah, I can go first. I think it absolutely is a positive step forward, and it mirrors what we're seeing on the ground at UCL. But very much this is a positive step in what is quite a challenging context, and we're needing to recruit urgently to fill what are quite urgent needs in schools. That isn't where we want to be in the long term, so I think it's worth stressing that. When we think about the number of students who've applied to teacher training last year, there was an increase by 5%, but there was then an increase in those who accepted by 12%. So the question is, has the quality of the applicants increased that much? When you look at specific subjects like computing, there was an increase in applications by 16% last year, but a 42% increase in those who were accepted. So that raises questions to me around how we are assuring the quality of applicants into the profession. And it may be that those are justified decisions, but it's what additional steps are we now taking to ensure that those entrants are getting the additional support that they may need.
Thank you. Graihagh?
The signs look good, but I think it's very early on to feel confident. And we know that teachers are entering a profession where things have never been more challenging. So it's thinking about that longer term retention and how the steps that we're putting in place now with candidates and through the early career framework enable them to be able to stay for the longer term. We have noted that the over 40s age group are at risk of not being retained, but some of the support we've been able to provide through Now Teachers sort of reverse that trend, and they're 36% more likely to stay than their age-matched cohort beyond 2 years, and sort of 27% more likely beyond 4 years. But that's obviously a small group, so it's how we can kind of translate that experience and share it more broadly, because ultimately we can have the green shoots, but we need to nurture them and feel confident that in 5-10 years current applicants will still be in the profession and thriving.
Melanie, if I could just ask you, there seems to be more of a problem with recruiting secondary teachers, and particularly into STEM subjects and MFL, things like that, than primary. So do you have any sort of thoughts on that?
Well, we're seeing this year changes in applicant rates to subjects and across our programme suite that are sort of broadly tracking the changes to the bursaries. So subjects that have seen reductions or removals of bursaries are down about 30% this year, but we've got increases in other subjects. So maths, physics, chemistry, and computing are all increased. So as we heard on the previous panel, the bursaries do track through into changes in behaviour in terms of applications. The relationship with the sort of targets, the DfE's targets, and then how those are then informing choices about bursaries are sort of dependent on a workforce model where some really quite nuanced assumptions add up to some quite big swings in terms of both targets and bursary decisions. And so we want as much transparency and sort of understanding about the way that those decisions are being made. That would sort of help us, I think, to be stress testing those against what we're seeing on the ground as well. If I could just say something quickly about routes as well, just to come back to the other question, because it's sort of in there in the workforce census as well, is the relationship between demand and supply. So on apprenticeships, both postgraduate teacher apprenticeship, which we run, is about 8% of our provision at the moment, there is a lot of candidate interest that then needs to be met with the ability for schools to employ and then support those apprenticeship candidates. And that is both a sort of practical and a financial affordability challenge for schools. The same, I would say, is true, likely to be true for the teacher degree apprenticeship, which is obviously brand new first degree apprentices training to teach at the moment. But the costs to schools for supporting their apprentice trainee teachers in those early few years of their training in particular, are really significant. So I think we're going to see a suppression of growth in those pathways until those issues are addressed as well. We also have quite a lot of part-time trainees that we support as well. It's 6-7% of our cohort this year. I think we will see a continued growth in interest in part-time routes as well. You can again see that showing up in the census. But again, it needs to be matched with supply. There's obviously, you need to know that those people are going to be able to get and then succeed in part-time roles in schools if that's what their situations demand. So the relationship between supply and demand is really important on all of this, of course, as well.
I would say that we have also seen that primary has been more challenging to place. Primary for us is always the cohort that closes first, has the highest number of applications, but it's become harder and harder each year to place because of the oversubscription, I think, from other routes into primary. What we have found, though, in secondary is that there is still significant demand in schools from serving low-income communities. Then you layer onto that, it's in certain subjects that we've talked about, such as STEM, MFL, computer science, and then layer onto that fact geography, and it becomes even more challenging still. We've been doing lots of work to try and target specific cohorts of graduates. So we'll do specific targeted work on campus with physics departments, computer science departments, to go and speak to graduates, talk to them about the need for those subjects, the fact that the role of teaching, that it's really, really appealing, and we'll work with specific STEM recruitment partners to increase the pool of STEM applicants who are coming to Teach First. We're also doing work then with candidates to increase the mobility, so their sort of desire to move to more challenging to recruit areas. So some of that is through conversations with graduates when they apply, and talking about the specific needs and challenges of communities, and actually that's where the forefront now of educational inequality is. That's why you should move to go to work in a particular rural coastal community that we've talked about. But there are specific challenges around when you layer on geography. The relocation costs are higher. Often it's really challenging to rent in communities that have mainly by holiday lets or are not used to a rental market. Graduates often feel isolated, so we're doing more work to try and place in clusters. So if you can place a small group of 3 to 4 people in an area. Also, graduate salaries. A lot of Teach First teachers start on unqualified teacher salaries, which, if you're out of London, can be as low as £22,500 compared to inner London, which is over £28,000. So we're looking at how we can redress the balance to say you get paid a London salary to go work in Redcar, Blythe, Cumbria. And also school budgets are more stretched in those communities. So I'd say that we're seeing the sort of same headline numbers, but when you start to drill down into the numbers, both on poverty and geography, you start to see a sort of stark need and then some underlying trends in that data that I think we need more targeted approach and funding to those particular schools and communities and the subjects that we're trying to recruit into.
If I just can pick up on the subject-specific dimensions, I think that's really important to us at IOE, where we have 18 separate subjects, and that's absolutely what we prioritise and pride ourselves on. When you look at, for example, the system as a whole, and you take, for example, MFL, which has a significant bursary of £20,000, then how those students track through the system, and what we're seeing is many of those students struggling to then get jobs in schools due to the costs involved in paying for visas and the cost both for the schools and for themselves. So it's about, and you can go back even further and thinking about university departments where there are more MFL likelihood of closures. So it's thinking about the overall system as a long-term approach. 25% of state schools don't have a single in-field physics teacher at the moment. There's 3,500 shortage of specialist physics teachers. That's information from the Institute of Physics. To address this is going to require a real long-term sort of plan, and I think Institute of Physics is proposing a 10-year plan, and I think it's that level, that scale, that ambition that we need to be thinking about, working with government to identify these subjects and to plan out in the long term the sustainable model for teacher development and recruitment.
And sticking with that subject for a moment, go to Darren.
It's really to unpack that because, as you say, despite some interventions, physics, modern foreign languages, shortages persist. And there is this double whammy. We talk about boosting the domestic market, but that doesn't exist. 50% of trainees come from overseas for MFL, 60% for physics. But then, as you say, they're facing hurdles like visas and costs, and schools are not sponsoring their visas as they used to. So what impact is all of that having on, and I should have said I declare an interest as the chair of the APPG for modern languages as well, so I've got some interest in this area, but what impact is that having on teaching and learning? We've heard a bit about kind of non-specialist teachers or even just subject reduction in provision, and you talk about the long-term plan that the Institute for Physics is proposing. For that and for modern foreign languages, what needs to happen? What must those plans include that we have to start dealing with now? And that can be across education, that can be across some of what the Home Office is doing on immigration, for example, visas, etc. What needs to happen next? We can start with Dr. Green and then any others.
I think it's about identifying the different parts of the system, and being explicit about both thinking about university, thinking about the teacher training route that they go through, thinking about the barriers they face into recruitment, and being explicit about those various stages. And then I think it's about removing barriers, so thinking about, for example, visas, maybe they should be centralised. once that level of thinking has been done and a plan has been set out, I think it's around investing in departments. So take, for example, UCL, so that over a period of time we have clarity around targets that are needed, and we have clarity around the additional resource in which to develop these teachers. Because at the short-term bursaries, the danger there is you'll see a spike for a year. You therefore need to staff that, but you're not developing in the long-term expertise in teacher education. So it's about the long-termness, having clarity around what the targets are, and then in terms of your point around the impact on schools, there's definitely a value in students or teachers coming from across the globe in terms of an MFL classroom. So if they are not there, then that cultural diversity isn't there either. Just to illustrate my point with the teacher degree apprenticeship, we're one of the pilot providers for the new secondary maths TDA. It's a fantastic program. It's 4 years. It's long term. There's an opportunity to develop a really secure partnership. But at the moment, that is funded. The 40% subsidy has been guaranteed for the pilot year last year and for 1 more year at the moment. So that level of short-term thinking doesn't allow institutions such as us. We have invested, but on our own risk. So it's giving institutions that confidence to invest in the people who are going to bring this about.
Thank you.
My answer would be to look beyond the graduates. We had a small but mighty 20 new physics teachers change career and join us last September, but a contribution to that physics number that's very much needed. I think building the potential for people to have hybrid careers. There may be people working in industry with physics degree that actually don't want to give up everything, but might want to have a mixed model and a hybrid career. And I do think that in terms of the STEM specialist gaps that we've got, that is an opportunity that should be well thought through. And then just building those links with industry. And ultimately the impact is on the pupils, and there will be pupils in schools that don't have those specialist teachers, so don't go on to do the A-level, to do the degree subject, and the problem continues and persists. And we have one former pupil who, when we heard that our funding wasn't going to continue, noted the fact that she was doing her MSc in machine learning because of the Now teacher that had both taught her, but had also done the after-school enrichment activity and sort of captured her imagination. So I think it's who's teaching the pupils, but then who's also inspiring the pupils to understand why that thing can lead them on to their future path.
I think it's absolutely long-term join up. I think it's long-term join up to think about the problem sort of end to end, or the problem and the opportunities end to end. I think compartmentalising this is really unhelpful. I think thinking about it in sort of short bursts of time is really unhelpful. We need a long-term pathway. We need predictability so that we can plan, we can invest. Schools can plan and they can invest. They can make decisions confident that the environment that they're making them in is going to be sufficiently stable, that those decisions are still going to prove to be good decisions several years down the track, because it's going to need that sort of endurance for the long term. That means bringing all the stakeholders together. So the point about visas, that should be a conversation that is being had with the training providers as well. The visa experience for employing schools can be sort of labyrinthine. I mean, it feels sort of counterintuitive, almost as though we're trying to not employ skilled teachers in schools here. So having a kind of a comprehensive understanding of all the stakeholders' voices heard in that, I think is really important, likewise in the long term. I also think it's really important that we're generating new evidence and insights in how we can do all of this better. So one of the innovations that's been possible at the National Institute of Teaching, because we've been established by schools, so we were set up by a national network of 200 schools, is that we're able to bring together the data that already exists in schools, connecting up workforce data with pupil attainment data. And that gives us a really powerful research engine that we can use to then look at things like the effect of teaching out a subject, for example, and the relative effect of that compared to things like experience, compared to the effects of different treatments or different interventions for teacher development. We need to be getting much better research evidence, and that needs to be based in English schools, because at the moment we're very reliant on research evidence that we're drawing on from principally in the States, but certainly outside this country. So we need to be much more forensic and curious about how we can be making better decisions to support teachers through their careers as well.
I'll be brief. I think agree with everything about partnership, long-term thinking, sort of better review of the evidence. I guess the bit that is concerning us at the moment is that in the here and now, for children who are going to be making A-level choices, GCSE choices for the next year, those children in low-income schools and communities are much less likely to have access to French A-level. So 23% of them don't have access to French A-level, 1 in 10 can't offer physics A-level, a third can't do computer science at A-level, and that's because of a lack of the teachers. And so that is having widening achievement gaps. So our sort of approach in the short term has been to go to university campuses and then speak directly to departments to recruit from on campus, promote the programme and try and attract graduates in those subjects into those areas. One other aspect of sort of the diversity that we talked about is also about having a teaching workforce which reflects the communities that they serve, and that's been another area that was highlighted in the Teaching Commission report as only 10% of teachers from global majority backgrounds compared to 37% of the school population. We've been doing lots of work to increase the population both of global majority teachers and also teachers who were on free school meals themselves, because the evidence is that the students who kind of can see someone who looks like them, has had a similar background to them, is going to be able to engage. And a lot of that has come through targeted campaigns, hiring specialist roles, who can go in and actually work with the graduate populations to inspire them to come and teach, targeted attraction, having role model ambassadors, and also doing research into some of the barriers. We did that with Mission 44, NFER and Ambition Institute to look at the barriers there. So some of what's coming through in all of those is about having more targeted campaigns at particular populations of graduates in the areas that we want to attract into, as we have seen having worked and we could do more of.
Thanks, Chair. The January 2024 review of the Early Career Framework and Initial Teacher Training highlighted several concerns, including, but not limited to, unnecessary repetition. It wasn't subject-specific enough. There was excessive rigidity. There was insufficient focus on SEND. And as we heard in the last panel, there were challenges with mentoring, and that included workload for mentors. To what extent do these issues remain, and what improvements, if any, have been made since the review? I'm happy to take anyone who wants to take that one on.
Okay.
First, yeah.
Well, so obviously there has been the change to the early career teacher entitlement and the early career teacher programme now for those early career teachers that are starting on the programme from this September. So that has been an opportunity to listen to the feedback from early career teachers themselves, from their mentors, from the leaders of their schools as well, and to refine the experience. The feedback that you're reading from there, of course, that was sort of in the relatively early days of the rollout of the programme. So it was really helpful for everybody involved, whole system level, in rolling out what is a really substantial piece of reform, to be able to get those sort of early reports back from how is this landing on the ground, where are the areas where we need to focus our attention for improvement. Certainly, speaking for ourselves, the opportunity that we've had with the bringing together of the ITT and ECF frameworks with the new framework, it's a fantastic opportunity to really reflect that continuity that starts right from the very first training in initial teacher training, and then flows into the first couple of years of teaching, of course, and to build in increased flexibility. So with the start of the early career experience, we begin with a diagnostic that is looking at the knowledge and skills and competencies then of the early career teachers, and adapting their experience through the early career programme in response, whilst making sure that there is that consistent entitlement, because that I think is really important, that we've got that consistent entitlement that draws on a secure, strong evidence base, so that all teachers can be confident that they're going to get that support in their first few years of teaching, but that it is also flexible and responsive to their circumstances and what they're bringing as they start in their teaching. So that has been a really good opportunity, I think. It's obviously we're only a few months in to the rollout of that new programme, but the feedback from our teachers and mentors is really positive. So 97% of early career teachers, in terms of reporting the self-efficacy, are saying that they strongly agree that the programme is supporting them with their teaching. it's 98% for mentors, saying that the programme is supporting them to be able to support their early career teachers more effectively. The adaptations for the mentors obviously have been more significant, reducing from the 2 years to the 1 year, and that is reflecting much of what we've talked about already in terms of that precious mentor time, and so making sure we are getting the absolute very best value that we can from their time on the programme.
Brilliant. No, thank you, especially for the statistics. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Yeah, so UCL is a provider of the early career programme, and we have similar satisfaction rates, mainly to what you're describing. It is early days. I think things I would like to comment on are around, the experience of repetition for our teachers has gone away, but bringing the two together has been helpful. But ultimately, I think when you look at the documents, it isn't clear how that progression is really articulated over the 3 years. It's really the skill of the mentor and the programme in how you make sure that students are not having repetition. Or teachers are not having repetition. It is a generic framework, and I think that will always be its limitation, particularly for secondary, in the things that really get young teachers excited is the subject, and that's why they went into the teaching profession in many cases. So while there can be things we can do in terms of case studies to help that, ultimately it is still a generic framework that applies across different phases, and I see that as a weakness. Okay. Just to pick up what James says in relation to Black and Global Majority Heritage students, we see in our own data that the outcomes in their training year are typically comparable to their peers. In terms of getting jobs, that's proving much more difficult. They face additional barriers. And I think it links to the sort of diversity of literature that underpins the ITT ECF. Should there be further elements on discrimination, for example, anti-racism? The focus on SEND is positive and oracy, so some of those things are positive, but I would just caution some of the underpinning evidence base that sits behind it is of a particular flavour, and I think there are other flavours that would be of benefit for teachers to benefit from.
In our annual surveys, we sort of ask our trainees and our network members about their sources of joy and frustration in the profession. And some of these are not limited to the early career years, but many of them are at that stage when we're asking those surveys. And we see sort of feedback repeated, and it'll be interesting to see if it changes sort of in the next round, that the intensity of the workload beyond their contracted paid hours. So 56% of career changers who've often had 28 years plus in quite intense careers outside of education feel that they are working harder than in their previous professions. And it's not that they don't want to work harder, but previously they would have had billable hours, toil policies, or sort of overtime expectations. So they're up for it, but they're slightly dissatisfied by what they're taking home as a result of doing that work, and many of them feel that is driven by some of the demands of the early career framework. Again, 52% felt they have less trust and autonomy in their new role, and again I think that comes through in the way they're supported by mentors, and we're trying to do some mentor training and support so that mentors who are working with someone who is in fact quite experienced, though they may be a novice when it comes to their teaching, and the starting points that you talked about taking into consideration in terms of sort of knowledge and skills and experience, and that's something that definitely we're hopeful can be improved and will be improved. And there's something about the pay scales not accounting for that prior experience on entry. Those who are particularly good and strong negotiators, potentially those in sort of STEM subjects might do better there. But I think there's something about recognising the starting points of people when they're coming into the profession, and that needs to happen through the early career framework.
Thank you.
I would echo everything everyone said. We've worked closely with the DFE, have seen really positive trends in terms of the satisfaction around the ITT ECF. Also increased retention, sort of early days, but improving retention as well, which is really positive. We've sort of added additional content around SEND and leadership to have additional modules to kind of round out the programme where we've seen the need amongst participants. And I would just come back to the point about mentors again, just to really make the point. I think that is the kind of really critical piece in the jigsaw, and particularly when you're working in schools serving low-income communities where, as we've highlighted before, if there's a shortage of subject specialists going into those schools, There's also a shortage of subject specialist mentors to train the teachers, and then to the long-term thinking that we've talked about, we need a solution to that. So we at Teach First have subject-specific sort of heads of subject who work with the mentors to support them on how to actually train the teacher in the subject, because training the teacher in the subject is the kind of the thing that we know makes the biggest difference from all of the evidence, and as Jasper says, where the joy comes right from the teaching. So that link between the training and the subject is absolutely critical, and how we ensure that we get the subject specialists into the schools that need them most is a real priority.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So the ITT Market Review report was published in July 2021. What developments have been made in the initial teacher training market since then, and how have those changes affected recruitment, training quality and the overall support of teachers? Yeah?
Yeah, I can go as first-hand experience of the ITT Market Review. I think at its core there are some, it put mentoring and the role of mentoring and lead mentoring as a key part of the, a solution to the experience of student teachers during their training year, and that was absolutely right. Beyond that, I think it has created an enormous amount of work for providers to implement the policy. So it's around policy implementation that I think is sort of noteworthy for this committee, in that hours were attached to things. So for example, hours were attached to mentoring. Every mentor should do 20 hours, lead mentors 30 hours. And what that did was it created an enormous sort of work stream in terms of how we as providers quality assure that hour is completed. There's payments that follow through that. So there's a whole raft of work that actually isn't benefiting the student teacher during that time. So really for me, the learning is around focus on quality as opposed to numerical values, because they are what actually distract from us being able to help students and schools. I think it's worth also stating something around the idea of the market review positions teacher education and teacher training providers as a market, and that expects the market to behave in a supply and demand way. But we're in a really interesting place now where we know, for example, there was a shortage of maths teachers. We have the student teachers, but to actually find placements is challenging. So it doesn't operate as a market. And so to view it through that lens, I think, has been very problematic. So I think for us, the benefit has been to really develop the lead mentor role, really situating the leadership of mentoring and new teacher learning within schools, bearing in mind that they are in schools or colleges or settings for 75% of their time, even with a university-led provider. So the quality of mentoring, which I think we are all joined up on saying, is absolutely paramount.
I'd agree, and I'll let Melanie and James comment on this one.
Yes, so we came in later on into the market review, so we weren't affected in quite the same way that Jasper is describing as an existing provider. Recognise also the focus on the sort of quality of the training experience, the absolute centrality of the mentor, and then the structure for leadership of mentoring within schools, and think that is really beneficial. We have found the process of the deep thinking about curriculum design, and then the addition of some of the experiences for the trainees, like the intensive training and practice components of the programme, to be really beneficial. Student teachers feedback really positively on those intensive training and practice episodes, where they are able to train in a way that gets them as close to practice as possible before they are directly in a school and in front of children. And that opportunity to really hone through deliberate practice their skills is part of what equips them to go in and be successful when they get into schools in front of children, and supports retention. So this point about professional development to support retention, I think, is a sort of another thread that runs through everything that we're saying here. I would say something about it at a system level, which is it has resulted in something which is sort of quite opaque at a system level about where provision is, and therefore what the kind of the areas of overlap, or perhaps areas where there is less provision, actually looks like at a national level. That is for providers or quite hard to work out. And when we're all concerned with meeting schools' needs and making sure that we are both, attracting and supporting new entrants into the profession, but doing that in a way that is absolutely responsive to schools' needs, and particularly those that have the biggest challenges. It's quite hard to do that at the moment because of this opaqueness in the overall system. So if there was anything that the Department for Education could do to sort of share a bit more about what that looks like at a system level, I think that would help providers to help the system.
Agree with that. Thank you. Could I just ask, in terms of ITT, are there any particular cold spots? And I'm thinking not specifically in terms of subjects, but in terms of geographical locations.
I mean, certainly probably to go back to what I said earlier, what we've seen through the high potential ITT programme, it's the areas away from major cities. It's often the kind of town that's 30 minutes from a major city, isn't maybe a post-industrial town, a rural coastal community. That's very often the areas that's harder to penetrate. It's harder to attract teachers to go to those particular cold spots because they're more isolated, they're harder to reach, so you've got a combination of relocation costs. And what we try to avoid is teachers going there on their own, because we know that's likely to not lead to retention. So actually kind of feeling part of the community is really, really critical.
I would say we found sometimes that cold spots language can be quite obscure what it is we're trying to talk about, and it can mean different things to different people. And when we talk about cold spots, we talk about schools, like individual schools. So the circumstances of schools that make it easier or harder for them to recruit teachers. And so whilst the point I was making just now about the sort of opaqueness of the system, and which makes it quite difficult at a geographic level to know what the sort of teacher supply, teacher training landscape looks like, it does remain true that it is way harder than it should be for schools that are serving areas with the highest level of disadvantage to recruit and train teachers. So I would always be thinking sort of at a policy level, hoping that we're thinking at a policy level about what is this like for the schools where the best quality teaching is going to deliver the biggest benefit for children.
I think we see something slightly different, and it's pockets, it's not a national picture, but I think there are areas where schools are in great need of teachers, where graduates can't afford to buy houses, but actually somebody in their 40s or 50s might already be living. And I think those are the areas that we want to tap into and think about the role that we can play there.
Can I just add one thing to that? I mean, we've talked a lot about teachers. I think we talked about mentors. I think the other thing that creates the conditions for great teaching to thrive is great leadership. And so kind of linked to your question, I think, which would help attract more great teachers to go to some of those places, is seeing great head teachers there. And I think there's a sort of parallel challenge around how do you attract really strong head teachers to go work in those schools that we've just talked about, because it's very often a very risky professional, personal and financial decision to go work in those schools, which might be a separate conversation, but I think it is part of the...
It's a really important point. I think it's a really important point.
Thank you. Darren.
Thank you. And forgive me, probably for time's sake, we just need one brief response on this. So if Melanie, I think you might be best placed to answer this. Since they were reformed a few years ago, have the national professional qualifications improved, and are they doing what they need to do in terms of both recruitment and retention?
I think they're playing a really important role, and I think the fact that they are provide a consistent entitlement built on a common evidence base, which itself joins up with the evidence base which informs both the early career framework and the initial teacher training entitlement, does mean that you've got the potential for this sort of multiplier effect at a school level, where you're able to train and support your teachers in a way that sort of brings in this sort of consistency, so you can get everybody pointing in the same direction. I think we are yet to really see that realised, that join up at a school level. So that's one of the things I think it would be good for us to be focusing on at a system level for the future of the MPQs, is to sort of tilt the balance towards it being a joined up longitudinal school improvement focus, with MPQs playing a role alongside ECF, alongside the quality of mentoring and alongside recruitment of new teachers and ITT. We also need to recognise that even that sort of national framework of professional development still doesn't reach lots of teachers, And so I think there's a very important parallel focus to the MPQs in making sure that everybody involved in teacher education has the support, the time and the access to evidence that they need to do the best possible job of supporting all teachers with professional learning as well. That's the reason that we are in the process of building a professional development evidence portal publicly available for all teacher educators to use, which draws from a living meta review of global evidence on teacher preparation and then teacher and leader development, because we want to get that evidence into the hands of the 75% of teachers. This is teacher tap data. 75% of teachers who say that they are personally involved in training other teachers. So MPQs will play an important role, but we have to think about the whole population in our schools.
Just to echo what Melanie said, Professor Chingu's published in May 25 from the Centre for Educational Leadership a report on MPQs and their impact, which clearly showed direct improvements in self-efficacy and resilience of those leaders. But I think to echo the point, it might even be an extract from the paper, MPQs are not the game changer. They play a key role, but overall culture and conditions is the heart of the matter.
Thank you.
Briefly, while we're on the topic of continuing professional development, so our committee has previously made recommendations in relation to SEND and the need for additional opportunities for SEND CPD and indeed additional requirements for teachers to undertake SEND CPD. I just wonder, because we haven't asked particularly about the role of growing SEND need in relation to teacher recruitment and retention, whether you've got any brief comments to make on that topic.
Well, I would say one thing first of all, which is good teaching is good teaching for all children. So to have this core focus on high quality teaching, which much of what we've talked about has that focus. The teacher education data set that I mentioned earlier on, one of the first pieces of analysis that we have done there is looking at teacher quality and how it is distributed for children who do and children who don't have a marker for SEND. And what that analysis showed us, and that is in English schools at scale, is that if a teacher who is adding lots of value add for children without a SEND marker is adding an equivalent amount of value add for children who do have the SEND marker. So good teaching is good teaching for all children at its core. That is not to say that there is not also a need for additional support for teachers to make sure that they are creating the conditions in their classrooms for all children to succeed. So I think there is more that needs to happen in addition to that. I think we need to be breaking down the barrier between the mainstream sector and the special sector. There is a huge amount of expertise in our special schools that can be supporting leaders and also classroom teachers as well in mainstream schools, equipping them to better support children with SEND. I think that there will likely be a need for some top-up provision for teachers and those with responsibility for progression, for children's learning at a leadership level in schools that will likely flow from the white paper as well. And I think we should be thinking about how we can make sure that we have that focus on core quality teaching and then build around it with additional support, drawing on special provision as well.
So I think the points I just want to make are around the importance of the teaching assistants, the new level 5 apprenticeship, and to have a real SEND focus there is going to make a key difference to teachers in the classroom. There are other opportunities, obviously the MPQ, the SENCO has been a huge success for us. The thing that I think is an avenue that has not been fully explored yet is the opportunity for teachers who've graduated with a PGC. They already have master's level credits. There are many M-level SEND master's programs that provide the opportunity to go really deep and really focused. And yet our student teachers who graduate are not able to apply for postgraduate loans because you cannot take your PGC credits and into a master's and get funding. Now that seems crazy to me because the sort of system has already paid for their PGCE, which is 60 M-level credits, to not be able to use that to then develop their expertise in an area such as SEND and to get support with funding that feels a real opportunity that we could work with government to find the way forward there.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Just go to Manuela for a final question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll ask the panel, and again, if you can be brief, to what extent have schools taken up the early career entitlement, this obviously comprehensive training program, and what potential does it hold for strengthening teacher development, including the skills to adapt, to teach, and support the needs of all pupils, but also mentoring, support, and ultimately retention? So with Jasper first.
Thank you. I mean, it's obviously still early days. I think from our perspective, feedback has been positive. And I think something that has been particularly positive is in year 2 of our programme is the opportunity for students to do practitioner inquiry. That gives them an opportunity to focus on an aspect of their practice that they would like to develop. And it's that type of agency in thinking about their own development that I think is absolutely at the core of the successful implementation of this entitlement.
I think for us, some of the feedback we get from career changers is that whilst they value the support of their provider and then the support of their school as an employer ongoing, as somebody who feels different in the profession, they value having a sort of a third space that isn't judging them, training them, supporting them intensively, where they can sort of unpack some of the experiences that they're having as new teachers but career changers. So for me, there's something about that broader network and third space for different groups within the teaching profession as part of this entitlement.
I spoke a little bit earlier on about how the programme is going for us in, likewise, early stages, of course. I would maybe say a couple of things. One is it's going to be very important that we stay future focused, and the way to stop things becoming crises is about looking at what's coming down the tracks and what is showing up in schools and how we can be best anticipating and supporting children's needs. So that's about the changes that might be coming, including, for example, from the curriculum and assessment review, and what implications that might then have for schools and how we might need to be anticipating how we can prepare and support teachers. But also, one of the things that we've recently done at the National Institute of Teaching is open the Centre for Digital Information Literacy in Schools, because of the increasing challenges that new teachers, well, not just new teachers, all teachers are reporting in terms of children with the challenges that they're seeing for children interacting with misinformation, disinformation and conspiracy belief, and that's showing up in schools as well. So that becomes part of how we need to be equipping and preparing new teachers and those that are already in our schools as well. So yes, I would say it's sort of going well in terms of rolling out the early career teacher framework, but we can't be content. This is never going to be static. We always need to be looking further ahead and anticipating need.
And I would echo everything everyone said. Early days indications are positive. The uptake has been strong. Critical to it will be mentoring, which we've discussed before, and obviously putting a big focus on that. And I do think also one thing I think Graihagh touched on was about the importance of teachers coming together in networks outside of their school and having peer groups and cohorts and community, because it can be quite a lonely place in the classroom if you're just in your school community. Actually getting groups to teach together, some of that stickiness and glue and connectivity feels like it's gone out of the system in recent years, and I think actually initiatives to bring people together is really, really critical. And there we find conversations come up around things like relational practice and parental engagement, lots of the things that are sort of core skills that maybe haven't been as focused as much on things like in the MPQs, that are big present challenges for teachers and leaders in the system working in schools in low-income communities. Knowing, teaching will get us a lot of the way there, but there's a lot of other things around it that are critical to ensuring our most disadvantaged pupils really thrive. And so having spaces for that type of conversation and development is really critical as well.
Can I just add very briefly to James's point? I think subject associations play a crucial role here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for coming to give our evidence your evidence to us this morning is much appreciated. As I've said to all the witnesses, if there's anything that you felt that you didn't have the opportunity to adequately convey to us, please do write to the committee afterwards, and we'd welcome hearing from you again. Can I wish our witnesses and members of the committee and our staff team a very happy Christmas. That brings our proceedings to a close for today. Order.